Hello all, so welcome to the next section in our in the module here. It's our Firebase authentication material. So from the previous version we would have been working with retrofit, but anyone could make donations, anyone could delete donations, which obviously is not the best scenario to have. So what we're going to do in this version is implement in our donation app Firebase authentication. So the way I've broken it down is as follows. You can see it there. I've got kind of this four sections. The first one there is with kind of a general Firebase overview, because this is our first look at Firebase. I just introduce what Firebase is, some of the history, and just talk about like the features that you can have with Firebase. The next section will focus specifically on Firebase authentication. So again, I've used a lot of the developer docs to kind of run through this and explain how it works, and then how we can integrate it then into an Android app. We will, in later versions, look at our Firebase database and then Firebase storage. The next section is our code walkthrough, where I look specifically then at donation and then the MVVM implementation. So we're bringing in a Firebase Auth Manager, we bring in some new view models to manage that. And hopefully in the last section there, when you're working through the lab, you'll see that the benefits of using this MVVM will now start becoming evident, in that there will be very small changes that need to be made within the app once we start to bring in our Firebase authentication, and hopefully we'll see even more of that then when we bring in some of the other Firebase features like database, like storage. Okay, so other than that, what I'll do is I'll hand you over to the first section, which is the Firebase overview. But again, any questions, any issues, you can get me on Slack or over email. Okay, so Okay, so hello again, and in today's section what I want to talk to you about is Firebase. Now you may have come across this already, but what we'll do is we'll kind of break it down over the next couple of weeks. So today I'll just cover a quick overview of Firebase, quick introductory stuff. I will then, when we work it into the labs as well, we'll introduce Firebase authentication. And then we'll bring in Firebase database and some storage, okay? And we might actually finish off with some Google sign-in as well, and there's a thing called the Firebase UI, which I'll talk about in later sections. But generally, what Firebase is kind of made up of is stuff like the following. We have our that's what we'll be looking at: authentication. We'll be looking at real-time database. There's other sections there dealing with dynamic links. There's a whole analytics side of things that will be useful to you. You can deal with crash reporting. There's this section called Test Lab that actually remotely test your apps and all the rest of it. But what we'll be looking at, as I said, would be the real-time database, our authentication, storage, and we kind of tied in with donation along the way. Okay, so as I said, we'll be looking at, hang on now, sorry, all right, this in this particular section we'll just talk a little bit about the history, bring in and talk about Firebase, and then over the rest of the sections we'll just talk about what I would have highlighted there for you. Okay, so a bit of history first. So originally Firebase was an online chat messaging integration service. Later the real-time architecture was separated to create Firebase database, just the database part on its own, back in 2012. Maybe you've heard of parse.com. I would have used it myself a while ago when it was active, but Firebase surfaced as a popular choice when parse went down, just kind of disappeared really. Google got involved there. Google acquired Firebase in 2014 and added a whole lot of features in Google I/O 2016, and continued to add features. I suppose that's the big thing about it. So now it's a complete BAA system, or a back end as a service solution. Maybe you've heard that, kind of come across that acronym before. So it's really, really useful. So to talk a little bit about Firebase itself, again, we just kind of skim the surface, and we look at then in later sections the specific kind of main sections like the real-time database, authentication, all the rest of it. We'll do that later on. So just to talk about what is it, because people may have different kind of ideas about what Firebase is. So kind of just posing some questions here. Is it a cloud database? Is it another name for a Google App Engine? Is it some kind of platform, a cross-platform solution that could be useful for you? Is it just another name for Google Cloud Messaging, right? Does it just deal with analytics? Is it just a virtual private server? So basically, what is it? Okay, so what it is, and again, taking some of this from the official developer docs, it's a complete BAA or backend as a service solution that includes, just go back to that for a second, right? Your real-time JSON database. That's really nice. And what I found very useful here is that if you've gone off and you've built some kind of service with a JSON backend, there's not a huge change across if you wanted to port your app and swap out the backend, possibly MongoDB backend that is JSON based, and bring in Firebase. Okay, it supports authentication, and again, that's what we'll be looking at in one of our labs. Supports cloud storage, cloud messaging, crash reporting, analytics, and there's a hell of a lot more, as I would have said. So like, if we just highlight some of them there, look, we actually have our hosting. There's a whole test lab is really nice. We've got our app indexing. You can actually remotely configure your apps and push out new versions and all the rest of it, especially when you're testing. There's the whole ad section to it, if you want to monetize your apps and all the rest of it. Okay, so it's pretty impressive back-end service at the moment. In terms of some of the products, you can see them here. As I said, the main ones will be like, there's machine learning, there's a nice one. We'll be focusing on kind of the authentication, cloud storage, real-time database. Obviously not the hosting, but again, I've done it myself. It's very, very straightforward. If you want to push a web app and deploy it to Firebase, basically you download the command line, the CLI, and you'll have it done in 5 minutes. It's really, really nice. But look, a load of other stuff there. Look, your Google Analytics if you want. There's as we said, our cloud messaging, our remote config, and again, that's like the highlights. There's a lot more there as well that they continue to add to. Okay, so you might ask yourself the question, why use Firebase? Maybe you have your Mongo backend working fine, all the rest of it's doing what you need to do. So why would you want to use Firebase? Okay, so the kind of the use case, or the kind of the idea I'm coming at here is that, so we say you have an idea for an app. And what people think is, create an Android app, what's the big deal? Sure, it's just a couple of screens. This thing that runs on your device, and you click a few buttons and up it pops and all the rest of it, right? We obviously know there's a hell of a lot more to it, okay? In reality, you're probably looking at, do you want to run it on, is it going to be Android, is it going to be iOS, is it going to, what devices do you want to run it on? You're going to have to use Cordova or something else maybe to port it across if it's an Android app. You probably need some kind of a web app to back it up, and support any kind of cloud service at all. If you want any kind of multi-user support, you're probably going to need some kind of a web app there to have some web presence to promote your app maybe, and that will tie into its overall backend. Okay, so there's a lot of extra stuff there that the user of the app never actually sees, right? From a developer's perspective, there's a hell of a lot more going on. Okay, in reality, it's a lot to learn. It's a lot of code, a lot of concerns, right? A lot of resources that you have to deal with, a lot of maintenance, and the most dangerous of all, a lot of unknowns. Okay, and then you have all this kind of stuff. So what about your infrastructure? What about scalability? Okay, the whole security side of things. Your reporting, your analytics and testing, and then authentication is a big one at the moment. We'll look at it in more detail, but basically every app now, if it's any decent at all, will have some kind of authentication in it, whether it's basic your email password, whether it's Google sign in, Facebook sign in, whatever. All of these make up that this idea for an app that you might have. So like all that makes up stuff that the end user, or the customer may not ever consider, ever see. They just expect it to be there. Okay, and that's where Firebase comes in. That will provide a lot of this out of the box for you. You just do some minimal configuration, and it'll all be set up for you. So the first one we're going to look at in the next section will be authentication. And what we will do is, once we can authenticate users, right, so there's our authentication, we will then move across to and use our real-time database to store our donations. Okay, so to begin with the next section, we will authenticate against Firebase, but we will still continue to store these on our node server, and then we will in the following lab we will port across and just have full use Firebase as the full backend service, and kind of remove the node stuff altogether. Okay, I think that's it. Just a small introduction. Yeah, there's our kind of are very important links for the moment. There's the official docs themselves, kind of for your Firebase setup. And what we will be using a lot, and you will be using in the labs, is the console, the Firebase console, so that we will access that, set up a project, and then go from there. Okay, so that's all the stuff we'll cover in the next section. Okay, so as I say, small little very brief introduction to Firebase, but we will talk about it and kind of come back to some of these concepts and points later on in the rest of the section. So thanks for listening, and goodbye. Hi all. So in this section, as I said from the previous section, we're going to talk about and focus on just Firebase authentication. Okay, so we'll just start off with a little bit of an overview, kind of talk about what it is, and then we look at kind of some code snippets and kind of the setup that you need to go through in terms of setting up a Firebase project, and how we would actually then integrate it into an app. Okay, so to begin with, most apps need to know the identity of a user. Knowing a user's identity allows an app to securely save user data in the cloud and provide the same personalized experience across all of the user's devices. Okay, Firebase authentication provides backend services, easy to use SDKs, and ready-made UI libraries to authenticate users to your app. It supports authentication using passwords, phone numbers, and popular federated identity providers, which we'll talk about now in a minute. So if you can just kind of picture this scenario, right? So this is a type of screen that's present in almost all apps these days. Okay, so you log on. You can connect with Facebook there, connect with Twitter, log in with your Google, basic email. You can, if you want, you can set up then a separate username, password if you want. If you're not too hot about sharing your kind of your Google credentials or your Facebook credentials. You might have to go, if you've forgotten your password, you might go off and get that password again. Just consider how long it would take you to develop all that from scratch. Okay. And that's where Firebase comes in here, and Firebase authentication. Okay, so like that would be a mountain of work to do, to be honest. And again, I've said this before, I'll say it again, no point in reinventing the wheel when you don't have to. Okay, so what we can do with Firebase authentication is that it integrates easily with popular identity providers like Google, Facebook, Twitter, and there's more as well there as well. You can actually have a kind of a GitHub feature as well, that you want to sign in, log in with GitHub. Okay, so some of the capabilities. Right, you can sign in users to your Firebase app either by using the Firebase UI, again we'll look at that later on, it's a very nice library, as a complete drop-in auth solution, or by using the Firebase authentication SDK. So we'll focus on that to begin with, okay, to manually integrate one or several sign-in methods into your app. So again, you can, if like the slides there we looked at, you can have more than one sign-in method if you want to. It takes a little bit more work, but you can do that. The Firebase Authentication SDK provides methods to create and manage users that use their email addresses and passwords to sign in, and the Firebase Authentication also handles sending password reset emails and you can kind of send verification links as well if you need to. Okay. Now, a few points to note there. You will need to register your app with the individual service provider. So if it's like, obviously if this with Firebase is all Google provided, with your Google sign in, your basic email password sign is a lot more straightforward. If you want to sign in with Facebook, you want to sign in with Twitter, any of those, you'll have to register your app with those as well. So there's a little bit more work you have to do on that end. So what I'm hoping to do is we'll initially focus on just an email password, and then we'll bring in Google sign in, because it's probably the most straightforward. Especially on Android, probably one of the most common and popular ones. Okay, saying that, there's minimal client-side handling, right, and it integrates seamlessly with Firebase, and you do have a ready-made forgot password flow with customizable email templates. So if you need to change the kind of the standard template that's sent out, you can do that on your Firebase console. Okay. So what I want to take you through then is, how do we set up Firebase authentication in a particular app? Now we will basically do the same in Donation, but in terms of just a general app, the steps you go through to bring in Firebase authentication into your app. Okay, so the first thing you do is you go and create your Firebase project. Now you can, if you want, if you have Android Studio open and then straight away you want to just dive straight into integrating Firebase, you can do it that way, and it will take you off, and it'll help you set up your project and all the rest of it. But personally I find it's a little bit more straightforward and a little bit easier, I guess, to do it this way first, so that you would separately to Android, outside of Android Studio, you would create your Firebase project. So you would be presented with this screen, or so you log on to your firebase.console.com, just to show you up there. So we log in here, firebase.google.com, sorry. And then go to your console. Okay, or like, so I suppose you sign in first, and then you'll be signing in with your Gmail account, your Google account, and then you go to your console. Okay, and what you get is something like this. Now look, here's, as I said, here's stuff I have, projects I would have been working on or previous, and here's the actual one we'll be working on in with donation. So I have set up a project already, but this is the screen you will be presented with. If you don't have any projects already set up, you'll just be presented with the add project. So you'll select the add project, and you'll be asked for a name. So you don't have to give it this name. You can give it a name whatever you want. This is your console. This is your project, and we will talk about some files that are specific to your project that you would need to download or need to make available to someone else if they were going to use your project as well. But as I said, we'll focus on that later on. So this is, you'll be presented with just the project name. It's kind of fairly standard stuff, just setting it up, right? Once it's set up, this is what you're presented with. So here we have, this is our project, donation project. It's on that Spark plan. We'll talk about those plans now in a minute. You can on your console add in your particular app, whether it's iOS, Android, or web. This way, we will do it through Android Studio because we're going to be working with our project, our donation application. But if you look over here, we have our authentication. There's our database, there's our storage, there's hosting, there's the machine learning stuff. You can actually have your own functions, whatever you want. Look, here's our analytics down here. So there's a huge amount of features and functionality that you get automatically when you create your project. So what we're focusing on at the moment is the authentication. Okay, so that's what we're going to look at. So again, we're still on our console. We haven't gone near our app yet. We haven't gone near Android Studio yet. We're just setting up our project. Okay, so just to I suppose as an aside, if nothing else, I guess by default you get that Spark plan. Okay, so it's free, has certain quotas in terms of using the database, your storage functions, all the rest of it. But for testing purposes, you won't need to go beyond that. It's if you need to do more than that, you have the options for other plans there. Okay, so just making you aware of that. So we're kind of the Spark plan is the basic one there. So as I said, we're working with authentication. So you'll hit the authentication tab. You'll see at the moment we've no users because we actually have nothing set up. If you want to, you can actually add users. You could set up users manually there. You could add in users if you want. So what we're focusing on is the sign-in method. Okay, so we want to enable just to begin with our email password. We will come back here and we will enable Google, okay, and our Google sign. But you can see there, you have your Facebook, you have Twitter, GitHub and Yahoo, even Microsoft there as well. So a lot of different providers you can allow the user to sign into your app with. Okay, that's just the next screen you'll be presented with. I haven't enabled the email link, but you can if you want. Just for your assignment, maybe it could be worth just another nice little feature to have in. Just make sure that you do enable the email password option. That's the type of provider you want to sign in the user with. Okay, so that's what you end up with. We're still on our sign in method tab. Just one enabled, our email and password. So that's our console set up. So it's ready to deal with users been authenticated against that particular project with an email and a password. You then go back to your Android Studio and into your app, and you go to your tools and you hit the Firebase option. Okay, so there's under tools and there's our Firebase. So what you get with that is this tab will open up, has all the different things you can set up. Look, there's our analytics, cloud messaging. We will be coming back to real-time database and storage. But for the moment, I'm just highlighting there because what we're dealing with is authentication. So you'll hit your authentication tab. I'll give you like so. So we just want email and password authentication because that's what we want to just set it up with. Okay. You're then presented with the following. So it's kind of like it drills down into these this extra information that you're required. So the first things you'll do, and this will be done kind of automatically for us, and we will have what we need installed for us automatically, is we will connect to our Firebase console and a particular project that we want to connect to, and then we will add Firebase authentication to your app. So that will install the dependencies that we need and that Google Services JSON file. Okay, but we'll come back to that later on. So once that's done, when you connect to Firebase, you are presented with your list of projects that you have previously set up. Now, again, if you were doing this directly in Android Studio, you'd have to go off and create the project and then kind of be brought back here. So that's why I find it's a little bit easier to set up the project first, so that you're just presented with the list of your projects and off you go. So here I am selecting my hdip-donation. For you to be whatever you've called it. So again, it doesn't have to be this, but again, look, it's your project. You can call it what you want. Okay, you'll hit your connect to Firebase, and that'll go off and that little set it up for you automatically. You then, when you go to add Firebase authentication, you get your dependencies added in. So you can see here's at the project level, right? And then we have at the app level. Okay, the numbers may differ a little bit. Okay, but whatever your current setup is, that's the one it's going to pick. Okay, so again, I kind of recommend trying to have your kind of your dependencies and Android Studio as up to date as possible. Okay, just accept the changes on those. You can see it there. Just say yeah, that's good to go, and it'll install everything we need. Okay, so then what you do is you introduce your authentication flow. So this is where the coding actually starts. Now, you could go off and do loads of research and looking up Stack Overflow and all the rest of it, but I would definitely recommend this particular link here. Okay, this has everything you need to install and set up and see examples of any of the features that you want to use in Firebase. So this is the reference I'll be using for our authentication, our database, our storage, and anything else that we might decide to have a look at later on. Okay, so but for the moment, all the any examples that we look at in our lab, and we'll see some of that in the walkthrough, I've gotten from this reference here. Okay, so highly recommend having a look at this. It's full project, it's up on GitHub project, so you can download it. You can even run it off the bat. You might have to just do a little bit of configuration, but you can set it up as is, and you can see it working yourself in demo mode, and then you can kind of refactor that and use what you need. And that's what I've done in the labs. That I've taken a lot of this and used it in the labs. Okay, so again, definitely worth checking out. To look at some of the code then, this is from the official developer docs, just some code snippets here. We will be seeing this again in the lab, and we've focused on it in a little bit more detail in the labs, but just to kind of just give you a quick first look at the type of code that we will be dealing with when implementing our authentication in our excuse me, in our donation app. So the first few slides here are dealing with creating an account, and the code is quite similar between whether it's creating or signing in. You still need the same instances, you still need the same references. Okay, so just to kind of walk through this here a little bit. To create a new user account with a password, complete the following steps in your app sign-in activity. So first of all, in your sign up activities on create method, so we will have a login, we will add a new login activity, and inside that on create, we will see something like this. So you'll inside that on create get the shared instance of the Firebase Auth object. Now, when we added Firebase to our project, we got these dependencies, which means we have access to these particular the library, and when that's imported automatically, so we can use these as is. Okay, so we initialize our Firebase Auth. So there we're going to use this authentication object throughout the project. Okay, and that's where we can get at then what the current user is, then it's the user's email, and a lot of other properties that we might need to look at later on. So that's the first thing we do. So we have our, as I said, we have our instance. Okay. We then initialize it and look for the current user. So when initializing our activity, check to see if the user is currently signed in. So this is quite a nice feature as well, that unless the user, and we'll set this up the same way in our donation app, if the user is already signed in, we will just take them straight through and we will bypass the login screen. And if you think about it, that's what you would expect as a user. If you don't sign out, you expect to be kept signed in, and that's what we will do as well. So this is something else we will have. So we will look for the current user. So there we are, accessing the current user property of our auth our Firebase Auth instance, right? This here, this is taken from kind of the sample. So if you look it up there, we have our email password activity. That's kind of taken from the those resources, that link I gave you as well. In here, all this is doing is updating or is accessing the login layout to just give back some details. What we will be doing is a little bit more and taking the user off to the current home screen. Okay, so this is basically just using the current user, whether it is instantiated, has a value or not. Okay, so when you look at the code in detail, and we will look at some of that in the code walkthrough, depending on whether the current user is actually instantiated or not, the layout changes. Okay, so another point there, point 3, when a new user signs up using your app sign-in form, complete any new account validation steps that your app requires, such as verifying that the new account's password is correctly typed and meets your complexity requirements. And now again, from the example that I've downloaded and we're using, all that's done for us already. Okay, so it's quite nice. It's some great starter code, to be honest. Okay. Next thing we do is, and we mentioned this back in some of the introductory stuff, there's these built-in methods that we can call automatically to do a lot of the setup work for us. So to create a new account, we pass in the new user's email and address, email and password that we would have gotten from the login screen, and pass it to this, just highlighted there for you know, this create user with email and password. So again, pretty self-explanatory, does exactly what it says. Passing in here, we are passing in an email and a password, and that goes off and checks to see, this will go back to your Firebase console, will check to see if the user exists already, and throw back some other errors. So that's kind of, we have our is successful or otherwise, right? And if the task is successful, so again, that's kind of, it returns back. So it goes off, creates, does it all for us, go off, creates the user with the email and the password. That will come up on a console, which we'll see in the examples. We then update our user, or assign a user property, excuse me, with that auth.current user again, and then pass it off to our update UI. Otherwise, if something went wrong, if the sign in fails, we can just display some kind of message back to the user. Here, it's just a simple toast, right? And it updates the UI again. For yourselves, it might be something different. You might take them back to the login screen, might take them off somewhere else, maybe. That if depending on what messages came back, if it was the user wasn't created correctly or whatever, you can kind of populate it there. Okay, we will see this again in our lab. Okay, if the new account, just to finish off the little bit of notes there, if the new account was created, the user is also signed in, which is like what would be expected, right? In the callback, you can use the get current user method to get the user's account data. So we will actually leverage this later on. So this is where you can get at emails, you can get at any other information that you might have wanted to set up. Okay. So to then look at signing in a user, so that's the kind of the flow for creating a user. Not too much different to signing in a user. So we're assuming here the user has already created, or sorry, has already registered. So we've created the user on our console, or Firebase console. The user has signed out, is now coming back in and signing back into your application. So again, we still need a Firebase Auth instance, which we're going to store in our Auth. So again, this will be in the onCreate again in our sign-in activity. So this will be essentially the same on the login screen, and we can see in our examples we actually use the login screen for both signing in and creating a new user. Okay. We then, same as before, check to see if the user is currently signed in. So that's identical to the last one. So there we are, grabbing the current user, checking to see what it is, and then depending on whether it's instantiated or not, is looked after inside that update UI function. Okay. And then we use, whereas previously we had our create, right? We now have our sign in with email and password, and it's basically exactly the same thing. Have your the callback, there it is there. If everything works okay, we, in this little code snippet here, we're updating the UI with that authenticated user, right? We can and will do something a little bit different in our own example Otherwise, if they didn't sign in correctly, could have been bad password, whatever, bad email, or authentication fail comes back, and then we update the UI with null property. In this particular example, you might decide to do something a little bit different in your assignment. I'm going to try and follow the examples as closely as I can to avoid any confusion. And I think it works pretty nice. Okay, so if the sign-in is succeeded, you can use the returned Firebase user to proceed. So that's what we would be doing then. At this point, our user signed in. We have it stored in our a user object inside our auth, and we can actually reference auth.currentUser, and that's what we will then use in our donation app to build in that multi-user support. Okay, so there'll be slight changes to the node server, which I'll talk about in later sections, and that will allow us then to store donations with a particular user, so that we can leverage that whole sign in, that authentication flow, to then integrate into our node server. Okay, other than that, let me see, I think there's not much else there. Let me see, hang on, sorry. Yeah, so we look at what to do with the authenticate user in the code walkthrough and the lab. So as I was just previously mentioned there, we will use that current user's email as the unique identifier to attach to a donation when we make a donation, so that when we go to retrieve the donations, we can retrieve all donations belonging to ddroneitwith.ie or whoever. Okay, and that kind of wraps up that kind of little brief overview of Firebase authentication. I think when we actually sit down and you go through it in the lab and you can see the flow itself and see the code in its entirety, things will be a lot more clear. Okay, so other than that, there's our 3 references again. Okay, so there's your console. Okay, we have the Firebase reference, and again, to highlight it again, the official kind of Firebase repo for all examples of all the kind of features that exist within Firebase, obviously covering the ones we'll be using, which is authentication, our database, and our storage. Okay, so other than that, thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye bye. Hello everyone, and welcome to the next section, and this is our DonationX code walkthrough version 5. So we're looking at integrating now kind of multi-user support through Firebase authentication into our donation example. We're still working with retrofit. We're still working with the node server. So just as a kind of just a quick recap, just to kind of remind ourselves of the server that we're going to be accessing, which is this here, slightly different name. So that's one of the changes that you'll need to make in the lab when you actually go to implement this. And also, we now have to be able to identify an individual user. We're going to keep it pretty simple, pretty straightforward, and we're going to just use a basic email. So we're kind of modifying the endpoints. So for argument's sake, this one here, /donations, and then with an email passed as a parameter, we'll get all the particular user's donations. Likewise, we can get an individual donation belonging to the user. So each of them will require this extra parameter, the email, which is what the email that the user will register with. Okay, so one of the other changes we will need to make is, because now we're going to be getting back this JSON string, a donation object which will include that email. Also, we've added an upvotes as well, just to show we can just add in some extra parameters there, and something we can use later on in our example. We will need to modify our own model as well. So again, I'll take you through that in the lab, the changes that you need to make. The service does exactly the same. We can still add, update, delete. We can list them all and look for kind of a single donation. But now it's all for an individual user. Okay, so kind of the steps to integrate Firebase and specifically Firebase authentication into your app is as follows. So you create your project, set up your sign-in method, set up your Firebase in your app. Again, I would have taken you through all that, so hopefully you have that done already. So what I'm going to look at in this little section is just the specific authentication classes and the kind of changes that we need to make, and then in some examples where we use then that authenticated user. So we'll just kind of look at the authentication flow and then how we use the authenticated user within the app itself. Okay, won't actually be a full walkthrough, just kind of highlighting the most important bits. Okay, so in our project, this is what we have now at the moment. Color's gone a bit funny there again now. Okay, so I'm introducing this Firebase Auth Manager class. I was looking a while and just kind of doing some research on the best way to implement this. So there are a number of different ways to do this, but the links I've came across, and I think I have it in the lab as well, I thought was quite nice, quite easy enough to follow, and obviously includes the MVVM pattern, because that's what we're trying to kind of stick with in our app. Okay, so what we have is a couple of properties. We have an application object we want to keep track of, because we want this to be application wide. And we'll see later on how we use this and use the view model and share the view model across different fragments, because we want to be able to authenticate the user anywhere inside our app, not just within the scope of an individual fragment, but the scope of the whole application. So what we also have is we have a Firebase Auth instance, which we're going to get from our Firebase console. We're going to keep track of a live Firebase user. So this is what we're going to kind of observe within our view model, but this is the approach we're taking. So we're going to keep it a little bit separate, and we're going to have another instance which ties into this Firebase Auth Manager inside our view model. And you can see there it's mutable live data of type Firebase user. So this is a type coming from the Firebase the SDK itself. So you need to make sure that you have the dependencies and have it all set up, or else just you get errors within your project, because this type won't exist. Okay, we're also going to keep track of a logged out and an error status. Again, mutable live data, but just simple booleans that we will turn on and turn off, true or false, as to whether or not the user's logged in or logged out. Okay, within this class itself, 4 other functions there. We have kind of the initial init, so when our Firebase Auth Manager is created, this is what we want to happen. And then we have a login, register, and a log out, which will basically tie back directly to the Firebase functions and those particular methods for logging in, for registering, with a basic email and password that I would have covered in previous sections. Okay, so if we just kind of look at those in a little bit more detail. So the classes themselves. So here's our init. So what do we do in the init? There, we grab our application object, we get that Firebase Auth instance, okay, and then we just do a check here to see, are we logged in already? Do we already have a current user, right? And if we don't, if we do, if our current user is not null, right, we update the live Firebase user's value. So again, this is slightly something different now. When we want to assign a particular value, and make sure it's going to be observed correctly, we can use the .post value, and then we pass and set it to this Firebase Auth .current user. Again, this .current user is coming from the Firebase, that's a Firebase object, Firebase instance, so to speak. Okay, and then we have our own ones here, logged out, and then error status. Okay, that we're setting. Again, we're just using those just to keep track of when the user is logged in or not, and if there's any errors when trying to connect to our Firebase and trying to authenticate. So okay, some of the other methods, again, I'll mix and match with methods functions, so we're all basically talking about the same thing. Okay, here's our register. Excuse me. I kind of look at this again in the walkthrough of the application running, but here we are tying directly into the create user with email and password. That's coming directly from the developer docs, a method that we can use on our Firebase Auth instance to go and create, or in our case, we want to register. So we're just passing in an email and we're passing in a password that we will have gotten from the UI itself, passed through the view model and then into our Firebase Auth Manager to go off and actually make those connections. Okay, just checking to make sure everything worked okay. So if there's a callback there on our task instance, task object there passed in. So if that's okay, we update our Firebase user again just to make sure it's all correct, because this is a register process. Okay, otherwise just throw a little error back. Okay, and then in the logged in, sorry, that was just, I suppose that was our register. Did we look at our, I think we looked at our logged in. Sorry, there's our login. So again, sign in with email and password. Same method that we would have covered in the material, same one you'll come across in the developer docs if you want to have a look at them. So if the login is successful, so this is you're going through the initial kind of the login screen, the login UI, and we'll look at that now in a minute as well. Same crack as before. Just make sure we set the user, update the live Firebase user, because this is what we're observing inside our fragments. So anytime it changes, that will update, which means we can keep track of which user happens to be signed in on the app. Okay, and for logging out, we're just call our sign out on our auth instance, and then update the logged out and error status properties accordingly. Okay. In terms of the view model itself now, so our logged in, we again separated these a little bit. This could all be wrapped up in one particular view model, but following the tutorial, and if you look at the links themselves, it does kind of make sense to separate out those different particular use cases, because registering is a little bit different actually been logged in. Okay, so you'll see a lot of the same code, but there's reasoning behind that. Okay, excuse me. So with our logged in view model, just keeping track of a few other properties there again. We have our Firebase Auth Manager instance, and there we are. So again, notice that we are extending from Android view model because we want to get in at the application object. Okay, so this app, that's kind of an implicit application object that we can pass in to our a logged in view model instance, which in turn then will allow us to create that Firebase Auth Manager, which ultimately will allow us to keep track of the Firebase user, authenticated user, across the whole app. Okay, here we are. Here's the live Firebase user inside our view model, and this is what we're going to keep track of. And then we update with the Firebase Auth Manager property, the live Firebase user. And likewise with the logged out, and that has the logged in has one other function, has just one function. Our log out, we might come back to this, we might revisit this later on, do some more with it, but for the moment, all we want to do is trigger a log out, excuse me, which will again sign out the user from Firebase. Okay. The login register, very similar properties. So again, you could see we could kind of combine these together, but just for the separate use cases, it makes sense to keep these view models separate, because if you think about it, the view model is really should be just doing one job. So there's a different scenarios for being logged in and returning to the app and staying logged in, right? As opposed to registering. Okay, so here we have our login and our register functions. So again, triggering within the Firebase Auth Manager.login, and also the register, which will trigger the .register on our Firebase Auth Manager. Okay. In terms of the login flow itself, okay, so this is the activity, and again, I've wrapped it up inside a kind of an auth package to try and stay in line and be consistent with the different features that we have with our detail, our donate. So again, we have the fragment and the view model tied up with that. So even though this is an activity, I'm keeping it all bundled up together in an overall auth package. Okay, so that in theory, if you needed to, you could pull out that package, bring it into your own application, and you could more or less have Firebase authentication and able to plug it in if you're following the MVVM, and should be able to implement it without too much trouble. Okay, so here in our login class, we have our login register view model, and then to be able to access the view model itself and get at the underlying data and our authenticated user, and our login binding to be able to access the buttons on the screen. We'll have a look at it now in a minute, but basically we have our two buttons. We have our sign in button and our create account button. So we'll look at that. We have a couple of other functions there, or on start or on back pressed, and we have then kind of dedicated specifically for dealing with creating our accounts, signing in, checking the status, and some form validation, just making sure that the email is entered, that the user is not trying to sign in with kind of invalid emails and all the rest of it. So if we just have a look at some of those functions in a little bit more detail. Okay, so what do we do when the login activity actually starts, right? So the first thing we do is we get an instance of our view model, our login register view model, okay? And we observe that live Firebase user. And if that Firebase user is not null, so this means it already exists, okay? And we have logged in before, but we haven't signed out, so it is kind of an active user. We jump straight to the home class, so we bypass the login already, which is what would be expected in a particular use case. So most apps that you're using, if you're already signed into the app, you would hope and expect to be taken straight into the app or to the home page or wherever you left off for that matter. If you haven't signed out. So that's what we're doing with this and keeping track of in this particular kind of scenario. Okay. And then we check the status just to make sure, keep track that any messages coming back from Firebase are all okay. In terms of creating an account, so again, that's tied to the kind of the login in buttons. Okay. So this one here, we create account, we create our sign in. Okay. So again, so if in this case, maybe the user has signed out, okay, so the user does exist, but we want to either sign in or we want to create a new account. So this is the first time the user is going to use your app. Previous scenario, they're already signed in, they haven't signed out, so when they launch the app again, they're taken directly into the home screen. So in here, quite simple, straightforward approach. One line of code within the create account. So once the form is okay, our validate form is fine, we trigger the register, passing in the email and password that the user has entered. And this email and password will have been retrieved from the edit text on the layout itself. And then if they happen to be signing in, so they would have signed out, but it already exists, we take them through and we trigger the .login with that same email and password. And that goes back to the view model, which in turn triggers the relevant methods in our Firebase Auth manager, which goes back then directly up to Firebase, authenticates, and comes back with a success or otherwise. Okay, so at this point, we can via the view model, we will know whether the user has been successfully signed in or successfully created or whatever. Okay. So to look at the kind of just the screenshot there, what we're getting is there's our button. So this is the UI. I give you most of this in the lab itself. So you're more than welcome to change it if you want. But here's just those two buttons. There's our sign in. There's our create. So the assumption is if the user is signing in, that the email and password already exist and are valid. Whereas if create account, it's a new account, so this will be a new email and this will be a new password that are registered and a new user set up on your console. So the first time you obviously test this, you will be creating an account. If you try and sign in, you should get back error message to say invalid password, sorry, unable to sign in user or whatever. Okay, so this is just the login activity. Okay, now once we're logged in, we're going to be looking at the home screen. Okay, so again, following the scenario here, the user has already been created or has already been has signed in and is taken straight to the home screen. But same as before, we want to make sure that the only user, an authenticated user, can access the home screen, so that there's not some way of trying to bypass the login and trying to access the home screen without being properly authenticated. So we bind to our view model instance. We observe the live Firebase user of that, and if that Firebase user is not null, so if we do have a Firebase user instance, so in this case it will be authenticated, we will have a correct email user with a validated email, we call update nav header, passing in the live Firebase user. Now at the moment all this will do will set up and assign the email in the nav header, but later on we will do a little bit more with it. So but for the moment that's all we're doing in this version of the application, and I'll show you what it looks like on the next screen. We also have our logged out, so just keeping track to make sure that if the user does sign out, so our logged out mutable live data changes and updates to a true property. So if logged out is true, what we do is we take them straight back to the login screen. If you want to do something else, you can. If you want to take them somewhere else, you can. But in this instance, what I'm doing is, in this particular example, just take them straight back to the login screen. Okay. So once they're signed in, what the nav header looks something like this in our home screen. Just simple as that. Just the basic email. So here we're dealing with Bart. So Bart would have signed in. We would have authenticated against Firebase, got back successful sign in, and then take the user to the home screen and display their email. Later on, when we work with Google sign in, we'll actually be able to display their Google email address, their Google username, and their actual Google profile as well. But again, that's for later versions. Okay. In terms of where to next, so if we look at our nav graph, so the way I have it set up is, if you can remember, our report screen, report layout is kind of like the home screen, it's the home fragment that they get, and from there the user can navigate. If they hit the FAB, their floating action button, they can navigate to our donate fragment, or if they click on a row, they are taken to the donation detail fragment. But again, remember, we want to make sure that if the user tries to access any of these screens, which are a separate fragment, that they are still authenticated and it's still a valid user. So we need to modify slightly how we access and how we bind to our view models within those particular fragments. Okay, so that's this, and this is how we do it. Okay, so instead of just declaring the view model up top and then binding to it later on, generally in the start or on create view, what we do is we declare it by activity view models, and this is a very useful extension function, right? What it does is, right, it allows we use this when the fragment is sharing data or communicating with another activity or fragment. So this allows us to be able to share this particular view model with other activities, so we can get at it directly, and any changes that are made even outside of observing the data, the live data, because that is only kind of available within the scope of the view model itself, which generally, the way we've been doing it now, is just within the fragment. What we want to do now is we want to be able to get at this outside that particular fragment and access the same view model data in another fragment. So how we allow that to happen is we use our extension function by activity view model. So again, we can just declare it up the top. That will do that first, and we don't have to bind to it later on. We can then just go and directly observe it. Okay, so here we are in our on resume, which is inside our report. So what we do here is every time our report loads and resumes, we keep track just to make sure that the Firebase, that live Firebase user is authenticated, is logged in, and we update the live Firebase user property to that user, and then we reload, we just call .load on the view model itself, because remember, this is still tying back to our node server, which is now multi-user, which means it could be changed elsewhere, could even be changed on the server through a separate client if you happen to be signed in on another device. So this is just ensuring that we reload and pull down the most up-to-date data from the server when our report screen loads up. How that is triggered, again, just to remind ourselves, inside the view model itself. Hang on, no, sorry. Right, is like so. So here we are inside our load. So the changes, this is part of the lab as well. Some of the changes we need to make is we need to now pass in the email, okay, of the live Firebase user that we are dealing with, and this is within the view model. And remember, because this is live data and we're observing this, and it's part of our the report view model, which we're now sharing. This is accessible anywhere across our application. So the part of the lab will involve modifying a lot of these calls to include the email. And again, just remember, because it's mutable data, we can't get in at the .email property directly. We get an error otherwise. We have to say .value .email or .value whatever that mutable field happens to be. So the .value will give us the overall donation, and then the .email will get at the email property of that particular donation. Okay, and again, remember, that's inside the report view model. The rest of them are kind of similar. If we look at our donation detail, so when we resume that, one simple call, we call get donation, but again, passing in, we say that the view model instance, we get at the live Firebase user .value .email. So we're getting at we're the specific email of the authenticated user who was part and maintained inside that logged in view model. And also there's our args.donation ID. So again, we will have covered our safe args. So this has been passed directly from the report screen to the donation screen or donation detail via those safe args, and again, all done through the nav graph, and we would have set up that particular function. So we pass in the ID on a report screen to the function. All that transaction, all that's looked after behind the scenes within the nav graph. So we just need to access it like so. Again, I will take you through some of that in the lab too. Okay. And that was our donation detail. In the view model itself, excuse me, there's the get donation function, taking the email, taking the ID, and there we are triggering our donation manager again, passing in now the extra parameter, the email, which ties back to our retrofit interface, which requires that email to go up, hit the server, look for the ID, but matching the email also. Okay, and then that will just display the that will update the UI and display it accordingly. Okay, in terms of our donation detail, some of the extra buttons there dealing with edit, and there's our, hang on, sorry, color's gone again on me. So here we are binding to our edit button and binding to our delete button. Again, I'll show you them now on the next screen. But the coding behind it, here we are again, all done through the view model again, just triggering. Remember, this is on our layout, and the rules kind of with MVVM dictate that all you really should be doing is triggering methods from your view model. So here we are just calling the .update donation, passing in quite a lot of properties. So here we are, our update donation, we pass in the email of the authenticated user, we pass in the ID from our safe args, and using our two-way data binding, we get directly at the donation VM object that we passed in as data into our layout, get at the observable donation, the live data that we're tracking, and then .value, which is the whole donation. So what that ensures is when the user is in edit mode, so you've clicked on your report screen, you've loaded up the detail, you can change that detail directly, and then simply with this one call here, we can then update that. So we are extracting the data directly from the layout. So there's our two-way data binding. So we can populate it by clicking on it and displaying it. And because we're using our two-way data binding, if the user changes it on that screen and then hits and selects the edit button, that will trigger this here, which will go off and update the particular donation. And again, we just make sure that we load our report model again, just to make sure that we're guaranteed a refresh, and we navigate back to where we came from. Okay. Likewise, we do the same with our delete. Don't need to pass in as much information this time. All we need is the ID from that observable donation object for deleting. For updating, we have to actually pass in all the new data. Okay, and again, it's a little bit brute force here. We're passing up the whole object. I suppose different versions, different implementations might only pass up the individual field that you want to update, but I felt this would just make it a bit easier to understand. So again, it's the whole data that we are retrieving via our two-way data binding from the layout, passing it into this our edit donation button here. Again, that's the callback, the on-click listener callback for both edit and delete. Okay, so what that looks like here is something like so. So here we have here. So if you can think about it, the user has, from the report, has selected a particular donation. So you can see here, so we can navigate back if we want to. Here's our donation detail. So these fields have been passed to the layout. Direct, a message, and an upvotes value have been passed to the donation detail view model, which in turn has updated, it's through the fragment, and then that's extracted the data. We've done our lookup in our view model, and because of our two-way data binding, if and when the user changes this property or this property or this property here and clicks edit, it will update it and will push it back up and trigger those events back on the server and update accordingly, which in turn will go back to our report, load up the new one, and we navigate back as well. Okay. So just to look at the on the layout itself, kind of an aside really. So this is important here. The @ equals, that allows the two-way data binding to take place. So for this example here, this is our edit message. So this would have been loaded up. So when we would have clicked on and we would have navigated to the layout, we would have passed in our donation VM. This is again via the adapter and all the rest of it. And then so we would be getting at the message property of the observable donation. That's our mutable live data. So that's an individual donation. But most importantly, when the user changes this message or edit message, they change the value here. Because of our two-way data binding, it's automatically updated in that donation VM instance, and then specifically the observable donation. So again, just to go back to that screen again, where are we gone? Where are we? Back here. This here. There's our donation VM. So that will contain the updated value, including that message that was changed and all the rest. So this here is a full donation that we're passing up to our and calling on our update donation function, which is inside our detail view model, which in turn triggers the retrofit interface, which in turn makes the call on the server. Okay, so I suppose what we end up with is this. Now again, we'll implement the slide swipe to edit in the next version. We do have swipe to delete working on this one. And other than that, it all goes back to our console. So again, just make sure that if you do download the solution to this, make sure that it's your google-services.json file you're working with, and it's your console, because they're going to authenticate against your console, not my console. Okay, and that's all that kind of metadata, all that configuration information is inside that google-services.json file. Okay, a couple of references there for you. Worth having a look at. As always, any kind of issues or whatever, any questions I might have on what I've covered there now, please reach out to me on Slack or over email. And hopefully when you tackle the lab, again, you won't have too many problems. Okay, so other than that, thanks for listening. Hello everyone, so welcome to the next version of Donation, and in this version now we're bringing in, still using retrofit, but now we're bringing in Firebase authentication. This is the first step towards where you're going to have to do a little bit of configuration every time, even if you download the solution, because this needs to be tied to your Firebase console as opposed to my one. Okay, so if I just show you my own console for the moment, so you can see here I'm under the authentication tab. Okay, so I suppose you can see there, this, I've been doing obviously some testing on other versions. So this is ultimately, we'll be dealing with our Google sign-in, but for the moment, this version will just kind of authenticate on a basic email and password setup. Okay, so you can see we've 4 users. There's Maggie, Lisa, Bart, and Marge. So I'll concentrate on just Bart for the moment, who has existing donations made, and we can just kind of take it through showing how that works and how it should work if you've done the lab correctly. And then we kind of add a new one as well. We might add in Homer just to prove that we can create new users as well. Quite straightforward enough using Firebase and the Firebase authentication. Okay, so as well as our console, just want to show you the backend server. So this is, I've done this is the node server again, accessing the /donations endpoint. So again, you can see there's a couple from Marge there. Here we have a couple from Bart. So if you just look at those, his amount, there's just kind of something to point out, 1,000, 1,001. There's another one, 234. So hopefully when we log in as Bart, we should see those listed in our list of donations on the Android app. Okay, and I suppose for completeness as well, I just want to show you, here is the backend database, the MongoDB database that the donations are actually being stored in. Okay, so what happens is we make a donation, for argument's sake, in our Android app. Retrofit accesses we're using the Retrofit library. We can access then the endpoints on the node server, which in turn accesses and then stores, retrieves, deletes, updates, whatever you want to do on our MongoDB. So if you were looking to do this yourself from scratch, this is like an approach you could take, but you'd have to build your own backend database. You'd have to have your backend server. So again, as we will see moving through the weeks, using Firebase to do essentially the same job is a lot more straightforward. So that's why kind of Firebase is always recommended as that backend service if you're building, especially building Android apps. But Firebase, as we know, works with your iOS and web as well. Okay, so if I just go back to our application, so see it here on the right hand side in the emulator, I suppose just point a note here. It's I'm running this on a Pixel at 3A with Android 11 on it, API 30. So you would need to make sure that from your console you have downloaded your Google JSON configuration file and have connected to your own Firebase console for this solution to work. Okay, so just to take you through some of the features. So if we log in here with Bart at simpson.com and punch in his password. So when we sign in, and again, now this may take a moment or so depending on the speed of your connection, but that's quick enough for me here. And you can see there was 1,000, 1,001 and 234 that I highlighted on the server itself. Okay, so what we can do is we have our delete, we have our edit, and then if we go into our edit, just click on it there, it loads up. And again, just to make a simple change there, and then we update and we come back and it'll refresh there. There we go. So there's our 1002. You can see it there, 1002. And if we go back to our server, there it is, and we refresh here, you can see it there in our list. Specifically the amount there, 1,002. So it's all kind of synchronized. Okay, and if we just go back for a second there, again, just make another donation for Bart. Again, just kind of points to note here, we're utilizing Bart's email that we've signed in. So this is all part of a new view model we've added. I'll go through that now in a minute. And then if we go to donate, and again we'll just do 1, 2, 3, and again direct. And again, keep track of the total there so far. So our total goes up. There's our donation. If we go back, look at our report. There it is. We've retrieved again from the server 123. And if we go back, and then you can do this yourself if you want to confirm. So just refresh our server again. And somewhere down the bottom there, possibly, there it is. There's our 123 amount after been stored. Okay, so if you notice, the main difference between this and the previous version, which didn't have multi-user support, is that we are now adding an email field to our donation so that we can keep track of each and who owns the donation, basically. Okay, so if we just have a look at the code behind all this, so it is starting to get quite complex. Okay, so here's our full project in terms of the code. So we have our adapters, we have our API, there's our Firebase, which is the new kind of package we've brought in, and then the existing models, the UI, and our kind of utils. So if we have a quick look just at the API first, because we would have had to change that. So in the client itself, the first change, let's expand that for you now. So the first change we need to make is we're now accessing that other server. So I suppose when you're running this yourselves, there could be no harm in waking up that server first, because it is Heroku. It's a free plan, so sometimes it mightn't be as quick. So kind of good example to just hit that server and wake it up. Okay, all the rest of it's the same, nothing new there. So that's really the only change you need to make on the server side. There are a few changes in the retrofit service itself. So if you have a look here in the interface donation service, there's a few extra little bits we need to add in. Primarily we have to add this extra parameter, the email, that we need to pass in our request so that we can identify the particular user that we want to delete a donation from or retrieve an individual donation. Here we are passing the ID, or get all their donations. So there's some subtle differences there, and again this ties back to the server itself. So from the developer's point of view, the client side of the Android app, we just need to know the changes that we need to make in the requests that we're sending in. So again, I kind of walked through some of those in the in the rest of the code there. Okay, so that would have been the donation service. Close those down. In terms of the model, so again in our donation store, we have modified, again passing in, here we are, look, there's our email. So again, we'll take you through all this in the lab as well. So most of the functions that were that need to be changed obviously are the ones, the kind of the CRUD functionality, the deleting, updating, and because we need to identify the individual user, this is the approach we're taking. Now look, there are other ways to do this, but I think this is probably the most straightforward one and easiest to understand. Okay, so that's the kind of approach we're going to take here. Okay, in the model itself, you can see here we are just adding in that email. So that's just one extra field we're adding in to just be able to, as I said, keep track of what donations belong to which user. Okay. In terms of the UI, we have in our Auth section. So I'll look at that in a minute. We'll come back to the this is kind of like the option for signing in. So we have our donate is still okay. There's our home, our report still okay. A few little changes need to be made in all these, which take you through in the lab. But because of the fact that we're applying this model, the MVVM pattern, it does cut down a huge amount in terms of the changes that do need to be made, should I say. Okay, so if we just focus on the Firebase element for the moment. Okay, so the approach I'm taking, again, I have links to the resources that I would have used as a starting point. Okay, so I'm bringing in this Firebase Authentication Manager. Okay, and what we're going to keep track of in here is a number of references. So we're going to keep track of an application object, an instance there. We have a Firebase Auth reference. We're going to keep track of a Firebase user, which is going to be mutable which so we can change that. In essence, what we're trying to do here with this particular class, and we will use this going forward as well, is to be able to, wherever we happen to be in the app, to be able to check, be able to validate, verify, and find out which user we're dealing with. Because if you think about it, using this approach, we have all the functionality separated out into its own little parts, its own little components. So when we're donating, we're using a totally separate component as to when we're displaying our information, editing, deleting, so on and so forth. So we want to keep track of wherever we happen to be in our app. We want to keep track of that particular user. So using this Firebase Auth Manager is the approach we're going to take. Okay, and again, ties back into a lot of the functionality that we would have kind of covered in the previous section. So if we just scroll down a little bit just to show you what we have in here, is we have a couple of different kind of code blocks, I suppose, right? So we have our init block, so this is going to be kicked off when a new instance is created. And what we're trying to do here is we're trying to get a Firebase Auth instance and then check to see is the user logged in or not. Okay, so we're just checking our Firebase Auth. If once the current user is not null, right, we're updating the user with that current user. So we can demonstrate this in the app as well. Until you log out, you remain logged in. So even if you, and that's what as from, I suppose, from a use case perspective, as a user, you'd expect that to happen, that until you sign out from somewhere, you're kept signed in. So we will have some other properties. Look, we have a logged out property. We have just keeping track of some error status as well. So up here, mutable live data, both of them, just simple booleans to keep track of, are we logged in or not? So initially, if the user is already logged in, right, we're going to specify our logged out to be false. Likewise, error handling is okay. And then inside the other functions that we're using, so if I just collapse them down for a little bit there, we have 3 main functions there: log in, register, log out. And that's all we want to do with this Firebase Auth Manager, is allow a user to be able to log in to Firebase, and we'll kind of authenticate against Firebase. If not, we'll register again against Firebase, and then if they want to log out, so that in theory a different user could sign in, we will use our log out as well. Okay, so if we look at our login, we're basically tying directly into the Firebase function. So again, we'll have covered these in the previous section. So here we are, here's our look, sign in with email and password, passing in the email and password. So these will be triggered back in a particular view model, which again we look at now in due course. Just adding a callback there. So if it completes correctly, here we are updating the live Firebase user property to that current, the auth.current user property that we get back from Firebase. Okay, and again making sure there's no errors. Otherwise, we will update our error status there. So again, mainly from a developer's point of view, just keeping track. Likewise, excuse me, with the register, we have it here again. Create user with email and password. So this is taken directly from those functions directly from the Firebase libraries. Okay, in our case, just for the authentication, and then we do our own little bit of work as well. If it's successful, do the same again. Update our Firebase, and then just kind of error handling, making sure everything's okay. And the last one there, which is our log out, quite simply we'll sign out of Firebase and then update our logged out and error status values as well. Okay, so this is a separate class that we will make use of inside a particular view model. So if we go back and see where we have it wrapped up, which is inside this auth package, okay, we have we have a login activity, right, with our app compat activity, keeping track of our view models. We have a login register view model. We have our own create, so do some binding there, tying to those the email sign in, the email create account. Okay, I shall expand that for you totally so we can have a look, and then we'll work back the way. Okay, so when we start,
when our activity starts, we instantiate the view model. Just get my colors right for there now. We instantiate the view model, our login register view model, and then keep track of the live Firebase user inside. So at any stage, no matter where we happen to be, if the user signs out and then they sign back in again, we're keeping track of this, and we will update that particular live Firebase user instance, which is inside our login register view model. And again, we'll have a look at that now in a second. Okay. Some other options there, again tied to the UI, which are similar to the tutorials on Firebase. So we have our own create account. So again, look there, we're passing in an email and password, triggering the register on the view model, which in turn, as we'll see now in a minute, will trigger the register inside our Firebase Auth Manager. Likewise, same with the sign in, we're triggering the login, and a couple of other there, check status, validate form, just kind of helper functions essentially, just to make sure that there's an email is entered correctly, that it's required, so on and so forth. Okay, but most of the work is done back inside our logged in view model and our login register view model. So if we have a look at the login register view model first, not a huge amount going on, so we can see where we've separated out all that work inside that Firebase Auth Manager. So all it is, if we expand it there for a little bit, here we have our Firebase Auth Manager, an instance of it, and again passing in a reference to the application. Again, this is interesting, just to make a note here, we're not extending from the standard view model here, we're extending from the Android view model, which gives us application-wide context. Okay, so that's just important to note in this particular instance, because we want to keep track of the Firebase user across the whole application. Okay, there's the Firebase user itself, which again is an instance, or we're assigning it the property from our Firebase Auth Manager .live Firebase user, and two simple functions that I said just triggers what's inside our Auth Manager. Okay, and again I take you through this in the lab itself. Okay, and then back in the logged in view model, so this is where we can keep track of the user itself. Just expand that again for you. Okay, so once we're logged in, all we want to keep track of is if the user actually logs out. So not a huge amount going on here, all to do with just the design, but once again we're extending from Android view model. Okay, you could, I suppose in theory, wrap all this up inside the one view model, but just following the tutorial I was looking at and the links I would have supplied for you, it made a little bit more sense to separate out that the concerns of being logged in and then logging out and kind of resetting all these properties. Okay, there's a few other things I just want to take you through as well. So that was our model. That's done. We can close down that. We close down the API, the auth itself. If we look at some of the activities themselves and the fragments, should I say, and how we utilize and make use of this user. Okay, so if we look at our report view model, so in here we're going to keep track of, so we're adding, so the lab would have involved modifying and adding to our view model properties. So here we're going to keep track of a live Firebase user in here. Okay, and then when we load up, when the report view actually starts, here we are using our donation manager again, that find all, but this time we're passing in the email of that live Firebase user, which will be the email that the user has registered with on Firebase. So that's going to be the Firebase email. Okay, we have a couple other functions there if you want to actually delete an element. So this is wrapped up inside the report because we can delete from the report screen. Okay, if we go back to the fragment itself, how we use that, there's one important thing I want to show you here. We'll expand it here now again. Up to now, we have been kind of creating an instance of the view model that we require inside the onCreator, inside the onCreate view, right? in this situation, and kind of will be very useful going forward, because we want to share that information and share view models across fragments. You can actually use this here, this by activity view models. Right, my colors has gone mad again. Okay, so if we declare our, here we are, our report view model and our logged in view model, there's the relevant types. But if we declare it by activity view models, okay, this allows us and kind of gives us a kind of a shared instance. So we can, any changes that are made here are reflected everywhere else we're using it. So we don't need to get the individual instance. This will be observed and modified and updated across all fragments that declare it like so. Okay, so again, because we want to keep track of the user, and if the user deletes and we want to go off and call something else, same with edit, it makes sense to declare it like so. So we only use it, we can use it the same way. So here we are down here in our report view model, observing the list, the observable donations list, but we haven't had to get an explicit instance of it. So just wanted to kind of highlight that. I do cover it and talk about it a little bit more detail in the labs, but just to cover it here in the kind of in the code walkthrough. Okay, there's a lot more going on in here as well inside a report, because again, we can swipe to edit, we can swipe to delete. So here we are adding both handlers. Okay, and here we are triggering for the delete. Here we are triggering the delete function on our report view model. For editing, at the moment, we're just working with the on click, but ultimately we will actually be able to swipe to edit as well. That'll be in the next version. Okay, and if we go back to our donate, you'll see something similar. So in our donate view model, right, we have minimal changes here. In fact, there aren't any changes at all, right, because it's in the fragment that we pass in extra information. So here we are again, keeping track of our report view model, our logged in view model, declared by activity view models. So we're sharing this particular view model instance. And then if we go down to our button listener, in here, when we add a donation on our donate view model, as well as passing in the payment amount, and the payment type, should I say, payment method, and the amount, we're now passing in the email of that logged in view model, our live Firebase user. So that, as I said before, that's the email that the user would have registered with. Okay, so the lab would take you through all those particular changes that you need to make. Quite small, might I add. Basically just changing parameters, changing functions to take that extra parameter so that we can keep track of the user that's logged in, and then and kind of validate against the backend server when the user wants to delete, wants to update, and wants to donate. Okay. Other than that, I think the rest, as I said, is covered in the lab itself. So I just wanted to kind of highlight that by activity view models, which is very useful. And we will see this again in later versions. We would have made the change in our API in terms of the accessing the new server and modifying our interface, which Retrofit will then manage for us. And then are changing the model as well, because we're managing an email. As the weeks go by and we start to add in some additional features, we will revisit the model and can change that as well. And we may bring in some other view models also, depending on what we want to do. But for the moment, I hope that kind of makes a little bit clearer about the our retrofit multi-user version of our application. So what we will do in the next lab is similar to the way we brought in the authentication, and we have an authentication manager and a separate kind of dedicated class for that. We will do the same in our Firebase package for our database. So in the next version, we move away from retrofit and kind of that node server altogether, and then it will all be nice and self-contained within our Firebase console. Okay, so other than that, I think that's it. So thanks for listening, and goodbye.